There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't make sense on paper. It's the workload that is unsustainable. And you've probably said it out loud, but you've watched nothing change. And yet every morning you get up, you do it again, you cover the gap, you smooth it all over, and you make it work. And what I've noticed across years of working with people in this space and a long time watching it play out in, corporate environments and also in personal situations is that this isn't a motivation problem. It isn't even a boundary problem, despite what, most of the advice is out there that they'll tell you that it is. But, by the time someone's at this point, they've usually already tried the boundary conversation, the needs conversation. They've already said what needs to change. And the system has heard them and they kept going anyway. And what keeps someone working the extra shifts after they've already told the boss that it's unsustainable, or keeping the peace with a family member who treats them badly? And what that is, it's something that runs much deeper than communication. And that's what I want to explore today. So, as always, guys, stay to the end because I'm going to share with you a useful tool that's a reflection exercise that might just show you exactly what's been keeping you in the loop. And you know what? We've all seen this, we've all lived it before. It's the person who sends the email flagging that the workload is too much and then ends up staying at work till 9 o'clock anyway. Or the person who has the conversation about how the relationship dynamic is hurting them and then calls to check in the next day like nothing has happened. Maybe even it's the person who knows that the system is broken and keeps being the reason that it doesn't fall apart. And it's not weakness. This is what high functioning, conscientious, values driven people do. And it's costing them everything. Because the system doesn't need to change as long as you're willing to be the reason that it keeps working. And you know what? Let's look at the reason why you can't stop, the real reason underneath that. Because the consequences of stopping don't land on the people who created the problem. They land on everyone else. That might be the staff, the clients, the team, the kids that are caught in the middle of a family dynamic that they didn't create. And the fixer's own conscience becomes the mechanism that holds that broken system together. The executive never has to examine the workload because the work is getting done. The family member never has to look at their own behavior because they keep showing up and absorbing it. And it's the same thing. The professional and the personal version are the same pattern and the same trap. Yes, they're different contexts, but it's identical architecture because it's not about the situation that you're in. It's that your values and your conscience become the very thing that made it possible for nothing to change. And, let me tell you a little bit about the other side of the loop and what the system is actually doing, because this is the reactive pattern from the other direction. And it's really important to understand this too. Because while the fixer is stuck compensating, the executive and the coercive family member or whatever the situation is, are also running a reactive pattern. They only move when the consequences actually land on them directly, not on the team, not on the children, on them. And what I've observed in, in corporate environments especially, is that the moment someone finally leaves, the organization suddenly finds the resources it claimed that it didn't have. They hire four people to do the job one person was doing alone. I've seen this so many times. And, they just needed that person to leave first so they could react to the situation rather than proactively address it. And the same pattern runs in personal relationship, the coercive dynamic, where someone controls access to people you love in order to maintain your compliance. And it only works while you're willing to comply. A controlling person doesn't examine themselves while you're making it unnecessary for anything to change. And this is a closed loop. The fixer reacts by compensating. The system reacts by doing nothing until forced. Both sides are locked in this reactive pattern, and neither of them can shift while the loop stays intact. So where does this pattern come from? Because this is a trauma and nervous system layer. And for most people who run this pattern, it didn't start at work or even in the relationship. It started somewhere earlier, somewhere where keeping things together, smoothing things over, being the capable, responsible one was either necessary for safety or was the only way to stay connected to the people that they loved. And the nervous system learned that if I hold this together, nothing bad happens. If I stop, something breaks, and it's my fault. And that's not a conscious decision. That's a survival pattern that got so good at its job, it followed the person into every system they entered afterwards. Because you didn't learn to be a fixer because you're a pushover. You learned it because at some point it was the most intelligent response available to you. And I see this a lot in women who are the eldest child and who've been taught to be responsible for their siblings, their family, to act as that pseudo parent, only without the power to make decisions, but, with all of this responsibility. I have vivid memories of this as a kid. And it carries through life until you're aware of it. I mean, it's funny when I look back at it now, but I spent 25 years in corporate making a career out of project rescue because I was so good at fixing. It nearly killed me, but I did it. So let's look at three things that work. Well, that can work, right? Everyone's different. You know how I work in this space, but three things that can work for you at the nervous system level. And after these three, I'll run into an exercise where we, as I promised at the start. The first thing is the pause before the automatic yes. And this is not a decision, okay? It's just a pause. Before you cover the gap, before you pick up the phone to smooth it over, before you stay the extra hour, your body will already be moving. There'll be a tightening somewhere, maybe this sense of I have to do it. I don't want to let people down. I've got to do it. That physical sensation is the nervous system making the decision before your mind gets there. And you don't have to stop the action yet. You just have to notice it, just to say, there it is. And that gap between the impulse and the action is where everything eventually starts to shift. But you have to be able to find it first. And the key is You don't have to stop the pattern to start changing it. You just have to start seeing it in the moment that it happens. It's all about awareness. The second thing is testing the assumption in small doses because the nervous system is running on a prediction and it's all prediction pattern. If I stop, something catastrophic will happen. And that prediction has rarely been tested because you've always stepped in before it could be. So I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying try doing slightly less. See what actually happens versus what the pattern told you would happen. And here I want to say something important because I think the tested advice needs an honest caveat. Sometimes when you test it, the consequence is real. Sometimes pulling back slightly does cost you something. And if that happens, if the system punishes you for doing slightly less, that is the most important information the test can return. A system that punishes you for doing slightly less was never genuine. It was never a real relationship or a fair arrangement. It was a compliance mechanism. And knowing that doesn't make it hurt less, but it changes what you understand yourself to be dealing with. Now, the third thing, and that's about learning to tell the difference between genuine care and compulsive care. Because you obviously care about the people and the outcomes involved, or you wouldn't be doing it. And that care is real and it's not the problem. But genuine care and compulsive overfunctioning feel different in the body. Genuine care feels like a choice. Compulsive care feels like there is no choice. And working out that distinction on how these feel and how they're different is the key. So I said to you at the start, if you stay to the end, I'm going to walk you through some exercises to help you understand this, how this plays out in yourself a little bit better. So take a minute, pause the video if you need, and I'm going to get you to have a think of the situation where you're currently carrying more than your share, right? And I'm going to ask you to sit with 3 questions. You don't need to answer them specifically. I just want you to notice what comes up for you. All right, so when you're ready, the first question is, whose problem was this before it became yours? Take a minute, and as I said, pause where you need to. Question 2, what do you believe will happen if you step back, even slightly? And is that belief based on something that was actually has happened or on something your nervous system has been predicting for a long time without it ever being tested? Take another minute, pause if you need to again. And the third question, when you imagine doing slightly less, not stopping, just slightly less, where do you feel that in your body? And can you sit with that feeling for 10 seconds without acting on it? That 10 seconds is the beginning. It's not the end of the pattern, it's the beginning of the gap of where something different becomes possible. And you know what, guys? I'd love to say that it could be as simple to just start letting things go to shit, to push that accountability back up to the system that isn't working or the relationship dynamic that's unfair. But what I've observed is that people don't stop this pattern by finally getting the courage to let things fall apart. They stop when they understand what the pattern actually is, where it came from, what it costs, and what they've been protecting by continuing. And what I've also, observed is around the systems around them, right? The workplaces, the family dynamics, the relationships. They don't change while the fixer is making change unnecessary. The loop closes from both ends, which means the first movement, however small, has to come from within inside it. And that's the work. And it doesn't start with a boundary conversation. It starts much earlier than that. Sending you love, guys, and I'll see you next week.